So my name is Collin Stewart. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Predictable Revenue, which is kind of a weird thing to say because it is a book. I didn't actually write the book or have anything to do with the book. I'm going to start wandering, and if you can't hear me or see me, just let me know. I'm going to make it really hard for a video guy. I apologize. I didn't have anything to do with writing the book. I actually built a CRM company first, which I'm told is sort of a rite of passage for every salesperson turned entrepreneur. And that didn't work out very well. And then we read Aaron's book and ended up sort of pivoting around. We ended up building an on-demand sales team around his model. So that's how I got involved. And I didn't know Aaron before. I actually read his book and I sent him an email. And that's how we got sort of engaged together, and eventually we merged our two organizations. Just to give you some context, I'm not bragging, our team booked 10,000 meetings last year. So most of what I have today, most of what I've learned from my team, I've learned from our customers, I've learned from our own SDR team, and it's not because we're smarter, it's just we've fucked more things up than anybody else. Most of our customers so most of the knowledge they're sort of niche software companies or niche professional services agencies. We can go deeper on what those niches are, but it's not super relevant. What is important is most of them are selling to SMBs. The deal sizes are generally 10,000 to 50,000, but there definitely are some outliers. I'm going to cover some things I didn't know, some things that really cost me. I really don't want to add it up because mentally it's probably a big number, but let's just say each one of them is tens to maybe six figures. There's some painful knowledge up here. I haven't always been really great at prospecting. I actually started off my life as an account executive. I used to sell kitchen cabinetry to high rises. I sold diesel generators to mines, data centers, and to your mom and dad when they needed a backup Jenny for the power, or when the power went out. And I sold specialty welding equipment to shipyards. So pretty cool pictures, but mostly they were $10,000, $20,000, $50,000 deals. And I will admit, I actually was terrible at prospecting. And as an account executive, I probably still am. The challenge was I'd always have really chunky quarters, or what my sales manager would call chunky quarters, where I'd kill it one quarter, and then the next quarter, I'd be like flatlining. It got so bad one year. In Q1, I smashed my targets for the year, and in Q3, I was having a conversation with my boss because he was thinking about firing me. I'm like, but I've already hit my quota. So I've just never been great at prospecting, which is ironic, because I thought, okay, the best way for me to never have to cold call again is to start my own company. So I started a CRM company. Yes. And quickly realized that the one customer that we had wasn't really going to sustain us, and that inbound takes time, and I didn't know anything about inbound. Not that it's bad, I was going with what I knew. And so I was back on the phones, and I was cold calling again, and driving everybody at my co-working space mad. And I was so successful at cold calling and selling the CRM system that we still only had one customer. I had to start cold calling for an investment advisor friend of mine for a bank, just to pay the bills. Then I ran into my buddy James. Mina, please get a picture of this. This is my buddy James. He actually is the guy who gave me Predictable Revenue. He's got all these great headshots online, but I chose the ugliest one where it looks like he's coming out of a hotel bathroom. So thank you, James, if you're watching. And he bumped into me in the hall because he could see me like walking back and forth to the meeting rooms every day. I'd basically be putting in like 4-hour calling blocks. And I bumped into him on the way to the kitchen, and he told me about this book, about this guy from Salesforce, and how basically the whole idea is you don't have to cold call again. And I swear the guys at the co-working space wanted to put up this sign because I was driving them bananas. And I told James, cold calling doesn't work, or cold email doesn't work. I said this. I'd sent thousands of emails, and I'd probably received like 3 responses. And they were all like, please stop emailing me. Your email is terrible. So I was like, no, James, it's probably not going to work. But I was trying to build a CRM system at the time. I figured, okay, maybe some insight into what one of our competitors was doing, and they weren't really a competitor because we couldn't really compete or really sell anything. But I figured I'd give it a try, because I don't know show of hands, how many people have cold called before? Put in like 6 months of 4-hour cold calling blocks and not closed a deal out of it. Yeah, it decimates the soul a little bit. You're willing to try anything. So I was like, fine, I'll give it a try. It took us a couple weeks to really get the email engine up and running, but all of a sudden my calendar looked like this, which was great for me, but we still only had one customer. Adding on top of that, the co-working space that I worked out of. James isn't in this picture, but you can see everybody's going for their headphones because I was on the phone again. And I was always taking up meeting rooms and driving. When I couldn't get a meeting room, I just drive my cohort around, or the people around me, insane. And so my buddy James came back. I love this picture. And he got him and 4 others, and I'm dramatizing it a little bit, but I like to call it my entrepreneurial intervention. And so it was James, and actually a couple guys from Bench are here, so their co-founder was part of my intervention. And they basically said, listen, you've been at this a long time, you're working hard, you're booking a bunch of meetings, but they're not closing. Please give up on your dreams and use your booking meeting superpowers for us. And along the same time, my co-founders and I were thinking of pivoting or doing something different because obviously it wasn't working. So we thought, hey, this is a sign. People are willing to give us some money to do something for them. And so my commitment to our engineering team was, before you guys write another line of code that nobody's going to use or pay for, I'll have 5 paying customers. And so I turned around and went back to the group and I said, okay, I'll do it. And by the time I'd gone back to my team and then gone back to my friends, there were 7 of them that were like, we're in. $500 a month? Sure, no problem. What do we get for that? I don't know. I was like, I'm just gonna send some emails and we'll see what happens. And it actually worked out pretty well. The first month, we were booking meetings with Walmart, the NBA, Disney. I'm a huge Final Fantasy, I was, when I was a kid, Final Fantasy VII. I was emailing with the founder of Square Enix, the company that made that game. It was like such a cool nerd moment. Jimmy Wales from Wikipedia was like responding back to us really quickly. It was such an exciting moment. And it really helped us start something. This is not a picture of my actual kitchen, it's a dramatization, but we went from $1,500 a month in revenue to $2,500. And we hadn't built any systems or processes. I was essentially, myself and an intern, I was replacing roughly 7 incompetent SDRs. And my wife, or future wife at the time, lovingly I hope, was referring to me as the ghost of dirty dishes. Because it was all a superhuman effort to just manually send all the emails, manually find all the email addresses, make sure we're targeting the right people. We didn't have any systems or processes or anything. It was totally not scalable, and it was a really interesting customer development customer development sort of experience, and people were paying us, but there's no way we could have turned that into a scalable business. And so we were struggling and struggling and struggling, and finally I emailed Aaron, because I was his internet stalker at this time. We weren't yet co-founders. I found his personal email address and his personal phone number, and I'd text him and I'd call him and I'd email him, and just general stalker-like activity. And ask for his advice. And fortunately, he was super helpful. And so I asked him, hey, we're thinking of doing this sort of building this model based on your methodology. Do you mind if we call it a predictable revenue agency? And he's like, yeah, but it probably won't work. Which was going from like, yeah, we've got so much revenue to like, shit. I can swear here, right? Yeah. Cool. I had a different word planned, and then I opted for shit just to make sure.
I just swear most of the time, so it's fine.
Cool. So the conversation with Aaron was a little bit deflating, but he was honest and he was super helpful. He's a really genuine and helpful guy. And he reminded me of this book that he'd written in a couple of pages that I'd probably read 10 times, but it didn't really sink in until I was really struggling with it. And it's the secret formula to predictable revenue. It's basically consistent top of the funnel and consistent process equals predictable revenue, right? Which is, it's in there in the book, it's plain and simple. The thing that we were really screwing up was that we didn't have a consistent process, right? And normally he's referring to consistent process for your account executives, for your closers. They've got the same sort of steps, and if they're closing at the same ratios and on the same timelines, and you fill in the top of the funnel with, a consistent volume, then you're going to get predictable revenue. But the thing that we really screwed up was process with our SDR team. We didn't have any, and that really was hindering us from growing and really being able to turn this into a viable business. And so what we did is one weekend we sat down and we mapped out the whole process from start to finish. These are all the things that we could do or were doing from start to finish, from getting that first email, finding the companies, sending the email, creating the content, and we sort of had this like whiteboard mayhem. And mapping out the process, we found some areas that we could automate, and we found some areas that we could find tools for, and we found some areas that we could find a team in India to take care of for us. And that sort of gave us enough of a system to get from those sort of initial 5, 7 to 15. So suddenly we had something, and it wasn't just me doing everything. All of a sudden it was that process that from start to finish that really helped us get really off the ground in about 2 months. So I went from Aaron said it's not going to work to 15 customers, and then the next month was not so great. And what we learned was that not all customers are created the same. And just because those initial 5 companies were awesome and really understood, what they wanted to do, it didn't mean the next 5 or the next 10 were going to have that same level. And so all of a sudden we went from our first 5 are doing super well, and the next 10 were not doing so well. And so we started looking at, okay, and there was a couple of bright spots, but we started looking at which customers, like the ones that are working, what's working really well for them? What is it? Is it the markets that they're targeting? Is it just that some markets don't work for outbound? We didn't find that because we had a couple of customers that were in the same industry, and one was doing super well and one was not doing so well. I'm like, okay, so that couldn't be it. We looked at like when we're sending stuff and all these other variables, nothing. And what it came down to is we looked at the content of the emails, and the ones that didn't work were talking about me. They were talking about my features. Feature, which as a salesperson I've done so many times, and I'm guilty of having done it in these emails. And the emails were, look at all these, like they had really cool products, and that was almost the downside. Because the products were so cool, you could sort of lead with the product, like look at how awesome the product is, look at what you can do with it. But when we looked at the companies that their messaging was really succeeding and their campaigns were doing really well, they were talking about their customers. They were talking about our customers love us because we've created this value, or we were able to accomplish X, Y, Z for this customer, right? And it comes back to sort of Aaron calls it the arc of attention. And I didn't have this at the time. I wish I had seen this before. But basically, on the far left side, you've got a cold email. Right? There's no trust, they don't know you. You are literally just sort of some bits in their inbox in the morning and probably interrupting their day. On the far right side, you've got your mom. Tons of trust, lots of social proof. She created me, so she's gonna listen to this presentation 3-4 times this weekend, without complaining too much, as long as I continue making her margaritas. But on the far left side, you need to find ways of creating social proof over email, which is challenging to do. But it's super helpful if you have case studies, if you have customers, if you have videos, or even quotes or testimonials. The customers that say, hey, my name is company XYZ, and I believe in these guys because they've produced this value for me. And it was so key. We've actually built that into our sales checklist. When we're looking at a new customer and whether or not we can make them successful, or whether it's any outbound campaign, do we have a case study? And if they don't have a case study specifically for that niche that they're targeting, it's a non-starter. We can go and send a whole bunch of emails and we can probably get some responses, but without case studies, without that social proof, you may as well just not even bother. Because the results were absolutely night and day. Like you absolutely can do it without case studies. It just makes it exponentially harder. We get a lot of founders, first founders that are starting out, come to us and say, hey, we want your help. Or come to me personally looking for help with outbound. Because I think in the Vancouver community, I think I was one of the only sales guys that turned into an entrepreneur. And so everybody sort of first looked at me as like this pariah that nobody wanted to be near. But now that I'm not interrupting their Zen sort of working space, they're kind of okay with me now. But the big challenge here is, essentially, your customers, your case studies, that's your social proof. With founders, when you're trying to get those first 10 customers, that's not actually the sales function. And I'm probably wrong on this, so don't come at me with pitchforks, because I'm also not a product person. I am the product owner if you follow Scrum. I am the product owner at our company, but I don't believe that selling the first 10 customers is the function of the sales team. I believe it's a function of the product team. Because you're doing customer development, you're trying to talk to future customers, and until they've reached a point where they've paid you some money, they're not a customer. They are a stranger. They're a company you talk to, and so getting those first 10, super critical. I wouldn't recommend trying to do outbound. If you're a founder and you have this challenge, come talk to me afterwards. There's some really cool things you can do on LinkedIn that is a totally different talk. So point number 2, social proof is absolutely critical. Don't recommend starting outbound or until you've got it. Unlocking that really helped us grow the business, and I'm not putting these up again to brag, just to give you a sort of sense of scale. Really helped, I guess, 8x our business, 8.4x our business when we figured out that we've got the initial systems to grow this outbound team, right? So we were able to actually send and source emails and source contacts, and then we figured out that how to get people to respond and generate value, which was the social proof aspect. And then all of a sudden, we started dealing with these companies that were actual real companies. They had other marketing channels. They had marketing teams. And all of a sudden the question is, well, what's your opinion, inbound versus outbound, right? And some people are really dogmatic about it, but I don't really care. And I don't actually, predictable revenue, I don't think really cares either, because Aaron talks about seeds, nets, and spears, and it's not specifically a book just about outbound. But there's benefits and disadvantages to both. I think it's a both. It's not a one or the other conversation, it's a both and conversation. And here's some pretty key differences. And really, I'm looking now, and this is one thing that's like painful to me because I screwed this up real big, like big time. And it probably cost me 2 or 3 months of pipeline at a time when I really needed 2 or 3 months of pipeline. So the key difference here, so if we look at on the left, outbound sales, you get to pre-select the companies that you're going to reach out to, right? So you can say companies that have this criteria, that criteria, that criteria are likely to be a good fit based on these criteria. And you get to sort of pre-select, and you can go after the bigger customers, and you can prove out some theories. But you're qualifying for, do they have pain? So top of the funnel is they're likely to be a good fit, but on the bottom, they're not necessarily going to have pain because we're interrupting their day. We're reaching out to them. We don't know where they are in their buying cycle. With inbound sales, something in their life has caused them to give you their closely guarded email address and sometimes their phone number and say, reach out to me, I have some pain. So they are putting their hand up saying, I'm in pain. And the thing that you have to qualify for is, are they a great fit? So they're definitely, both have their advantages and disadvantages to both. What we found with outbound, the thing that we screwed up in the early days, was we were going from, when you're moving from inbound and starting outbound, they feel like crappy leads, right? If you're a Miller Hyman or Sandler trained guy or gal that's been selling for a long time, you're going to be saying, there's no trigger event, right? You'll find you'll outbound to some companies and they'll have, there's going to be pain, but there might not be that big event that's going to cause them to, yes, this is on my OKRs for this quarter. Sometimes you'll get that, and that's sort of getting lucky. But in order for us to be really successful with outbound, we had to nurture. And until we figured out how to properly nurture those deals and figure out, okay, it's not a great fit now, but when is the next sort of trigger event in your life that we should reach out and be in touch? And once we figured that out, we started to get multiples more out of our, probably 4 or 5x more in deal flow out of our outbound program. This is a random picture I pulled off the internet. If you can't see it, he's juggling pineapples, which doesn't sound like a good idea in the first place. I bet there was alcohol involved. Unfortunately, there was no alcohol involved in this next decision we made, which was we had an inbound person, and we're like, okay, well, we're the company that helps other companies with outbound. It's crazy that we don't have an outbound person. So we'll just get the person who's doing inbound. We're also a bootstrap company, so we couldn't go and hire 10 SDRs. So we figured, okay, we've got some systems that scale, we know quite a bit about it. Let's just get our inbound person to also do outbound in their spare time, which was just a colossal fuck up, because with inbound, those people have motivation, they have pain, right? In your email inbox, they're coming to you saying, please help me. Please, there's something wrong in my life that I think your product can solve for me. With outbound, it's the opposite. You're pre-selecting companies that you think you can help, and you're sort of trying to qualify, hey, is there any pain here? And it's really easy to sort of have this conversation at a high level, but when it comes to it on a day-to-day basis as an SDR, it's really easy to just skew to, I'd much rather just go to my inbox where there's these nice people that really want my help that are coming to me and asking a ton of questions. There's a way more motivation there. And so having that same rep do both meant that she wasn't going to do outbound. And not her fault of the system. If I was in the exact same situation, I probably would have done the exact same thing. Not her fault at all. Just the way we design the role. And we've seen this replicated in numerous of our customers and the coaching clients that we've worked with and other entrepreneurs that we've worked with. When you're having a single rep, if you're not specializing all the way down to an inbound and an outbound rep, they're always going to skew to inbound because it's just mentally a whole lot easier. So third sort of piece we're talking about is specializing your sales roles. Please don't juggle, especially don't juggle pineapples. This one helped us, this next sort of figuring that out really helped us move away from just an inbound being just, our revenue was just driven from inbound and helped us really grow the company. You know, it's an impressive looking number, but it took us way longer than a year, probably closer to 2, maybe a little bit longer, but longer than a year sounds way better on a slide. So I decided to put that up just to be impressive. And the next thing we figured out was, as a salesperson, I thought, like I've been an account exec most of my life, so I figured, what do salespeople want? They want more meetings. And then we went and we asked all the salespeople that we were working with, what do you guys want? And they all said, more meetings. I was really hoping you're all going to shout it at me, but that's fine. And so we were ramping up in like 2-3 months to 40, 50, 60 meetings a month. And we had this great data person, and she put all the data into Tableau to find something that's just like mind-numbingly obvious, is that in the early days, customers that ramped up to 50, that we were like booking 60 meetings a month for in the first 5 months would churn, almost every single one of them. And I was like, well, this I don't know, I don't get it. They want meetings. We ask them what they want more of. They said, we want more meetings. We deliver more meetings. And then they're like, no, see you later. And what we found was salespeople don't actually want more meetings. They want more meetings that are going to turn into customers. And the thing that we missed was that sort of connection of making sure that it's the right campaign, making sure that it's the right person, and not just doing anything we could to get somebody to take a meeting. And again, it wasn't the fault of the individuals in the system, it was just the way that we built the metrics. We had all these scores that added up and classified our revenue by green, red, yellow, and all of these customers that were 50, 60 a month, they were all green and they were all churning. And I was like, wait a minute, if a customer is green, they're more likely to churn. Something is wrong here. And so we ended up rebuilding the SDR function with a real focus on quality. We stopped focusing on, in the first sort of 6 months, we stopped focusing on, let's just produce as many meetings as we can. Let's hit these quality metrics as fast as we can. And what we looked at, the first quality metric was, are people opening my emails? The second one, if they opened it, did they respond positively? As in, they're not, sending us pictures of them holding a baseball bat or threatening to whatever, come track us down. We've had some really interesting ones. So they're opening your emails, they're responding positively, they are showing up to meetings. Those meetings are, the salespeople are putting them into pipeline, and then those meetings that are going into pipeline, or the opportunities that are going into pipeline, are closing. And until we sort of rebuilt our SDR function to focus on those 5, we were almost burning bridges with our account executives because we're taking up, like we're professionally wasting their time. We're taking them away from core selling activities. And maybe it was definitely all of our fault. But once you've got a couple bad ones, and you've given a couple bad ones to a salesperson, and this is me included, I'm not, again, not a fault or blaming our account execs, I've done this exact same thing. But once you've given a couple bad meetings to a salesperson and a couple consecutive ones where they no-show or they show up and they're just totally the wrong person, you start to burn that bridge a little bit. They're like, all these meetings from this like outbound team, these are all garbage. And it wasn't necessarily the fault of outbound, it was the fault that we hadn't quite tuned it to produce the meetings with the right people, or the meetings with the right people for the right reasons. And those were some really huge learnings that, again, cost our business personally, not just for the customers that we're working for, but for our outbound team. Our account executives just weren't. Like, we're the company that helps other companies build outbound teams. And our own account executives were saying, these meetings are garbage. And I was like, the world is falling. And so figuring that out really had a huge impact, not just on the business, but on the mental health of our salespeople. Now, they not loved me again, but they were less angry at me for the time being. And so when you're going back and looking at this, like, think about quality first, then quantity. And so make sure you've got those, people are opening it, they're responding positively, they're showing up to meetings, super critical. The meetings, the people that do show up are actually turning into pipeline, also critical, and then they are eventually closing. And really, at the end of the day, that's all you really care about, but all these other ones are sort of leading indicators that can tell you, are we heading in the right direction? Because if you're not building a solid base, I always talk about it as a pyramid, and I managed not to put a pyramid graph in here, but if you don't have that solid base, that solid foundation, it's really hard to sort of get to the top of the peak. So the next sort of, this wasn't really something that we screwed up, it's just, it's something I screwed up. And it's something that we noticed, just sort of casually looking at the metrics every week. We had some customers that were murdering it. They were doing so much better than ourselves with the campaigns that we're running for them. Same inputs, very similar messaging, similar targeting, different products, and they were killing it. And we're like, what is going on? How is this happening? How are our customers beating us at our own game? And when we start to dig deep on it, we use this, it doesn't really show up very well here, but I've included a link in the presentation. I can send out the slides afterwards so that you can see. But basically we ran this, we call it a Nail a Niche workshop. We essentially profile the companies that we were working with, and who's using the product and how are they using the product. So this is almost going back to the product management fundamentals, like who are those user personas and what are they using it for, right? What is that shared pain amongst that use case? What is the believable solution? I always put believable solution on the board because it forces the inner marketer in me to not come up with like words that are like the best and market leading and things like that, because it's so tempting to throw that into your messaging. But it's a huge distraction when you're trying to communicate this is exactly what we do. And we noticed that the companies that were really killing it, they had what we called nailed the niche. They had really figured out that one specific use case, and they had a case study that backed it up. So they could show that for a small city that needs help communicating about recycling and trash schedules, we have a piece of software that can help. And if you've got case studies from nearby cities, I'm sort of making this one up, but if you've got case studies from nearby cities, that really helps with the campaign. And so these were the ones, when you go back, that were like leading the pack. And so we're like, okay, well, how can we replicate this? And it was right around the time when we had stopped focusing on quantity of meetings and we'd started focusing on quality. And we had this customer, this is not their logo, the company's called Whiteboard Geeks. They were a whiteboard video company. So you've seen those like RSA animate videos on YouTube that are really cool, really helpful explainers. We've got a bunch of marketers here. You've probably done these types of, or bought these videos before, or built them before. And so they did these for marketers. And they did whiteboard videos for all marketers in this room. And so we started off the campaign saying, let's reach out to every single marketer. And let's use this, they only had a few case studies, so we'll pick our favorite case study and we'll use it to send out to the campaign. And we had a okay campaign going. We had some responses. They were hitting benchmarks, but not really smashing it out of the park, right around the time when we were investigating this sort of niche thing. And at around about the 90-day mark, I got a call from the CEO, Lance, saying, Collin, we gave it a good kick, but we want to cancel. You guys, you've booked some meetings for us, but nothing's turned into business. It's like, okay, Lance, that's fair. Part of our exit interview process, we actually have to do a campaign wrap report. And so our team goes through all the data that we've produced and we wrap it up in this nice report that probably nobody reads, but we want to make sure we're sharing everything. And what the team noticed was the campaign actually had very, very average, like exceptionally average metrics. But if they took away all of the rest of the data and just focused on this one segment, it actually had numbers that were blowing it out of the park. Like some of the best numbers of any campaign that we were running. But we had to sort of isolate this one small subsegment, this one variable. And so when we got on the call with Lance, we sort of asked him and say, hey, Lance, like, do you guys ever work with biotech companies? Because when we sort of looked at it, you had an exceptionally high response rate. Like almost everybody in the industry, or everybody in the industry that we reached out to, almost everyone responded. That's a huge response rate. And it turned out that yes, they actually had a couple of customers. They were in the biotech space. But we hadn't really used that in the messaging. We'd used a biotech case study, but we hadn't really niched down to any specific sort of marketing use case. And so they decided to give it another couple of months and just see if maybe there was something here. And the results were surprised myself. They created a little sub-brand, and really the sub-brand was just a single marketing like landing page with a different name and a different domain. And it talked specifically about their case study around the biotech space. I'm just going to grab a bit of water here. And so they started reaching out specifically to companies, to marketing, people with a marketing title in the biotech space. And the results 7x'd in like 30 days. All of a sudden, people were responding. And within 60 days, they were closing deals. Within 90 days, they had more pipeline than they'd ever had. And to date, 80% of their net new customers come from their outbound program. And they're not just working with us, they do a bunch of other things. But it's the difference between they were ready to give up on outbound because they'd seen mediocre results, and now 80% of their net new customers come from outbound. So there's the link to the niche workshop. There's a couple links on that page, but it's basically got a link to the PDF, to a PDF with a bunch of questions and a picture of the niche workshop we did here. And going through this experience with Lance reminded me of this. It's a Seneca quote, a Stoic philosopher similar to Marcus Aurelius. And it's, "Our plans miscarry because they have no aim. When a man does not know what harbor he is making for, no wind is the right wind." And it really stuck with me because I realized that it wasn't our sales team's fault, and it wasn't our marketing team's fault. It wasn't even our SDR's fault that our performance, our SDR team's performance hadn't really hit these 7x benchmarks that Whiteboard Geeks was. It was mine. I'm the guy who sits on top of product and marketing and sales, and it's my responsibility to make sure that I'm giving our sales team the correct direction. And so when I sat down with my sales team to say, hey, like looking at what we were doing for our outbound campaigns and for our programs, I realized that I hadn't given them that. And we haven't seen a 7x, but it was probably close to like a 5.5x improvement in the results once we really niched down and we had those case studies. And that was a huge learning for me because we probably spent, and maybe I was a bit arrogant about it, but we definitely spent 6 months probably targeting the wrong people for our own campaigns. So my key learning there was, as the CEO, I'm supposed to set the sales strategy. Even though I'm not actually going to execute it, and I have a great VP of sales, sales manager, SDR manager to run things for me, it's still my job to make sure we're pointing in the right direction. Because if we're trying to sell sales tools to farmers in Nebraska, it doesn't matter how hard the sales team works, they're not gonna be able to produce anything. Some of the things we talked about today, the secret, not so secret, predictable revenue formula, the importance of social proof, differences between inbound and outbound. It's a both and conversation, not one or the other. The importance of quality and how key it is to actually have a niche. So steal what I've learned and the mistakes that I've made, go make your own mistakes, and then email me so I can not make those mistakes in the future. Thanks very much.
Time for questions. Okay, first I have a question. I asked you this before. So we live in Canada, and we actually talked about this on the phone.
Yep.
Canada is changing things as of July, and you said you're not supporting Canadian customers anymore.
Yeah.
So what is the future of outbound sales in Canada because of the CAN-SPAM Act?
Well, so
Castle.
This is confusing. Yeah, I always thought CAN-SPAM was the Canadian spam legislation, but it's actually the American.
Yes.
And Castle is the Canadian. When Castle came into effect, it was really hard for our business. It probably cut $20K in monthly recurring off our business at a time when we didn't have $20K. So the future of prospecting into Canada, unfortunately, looks a lot like prospecting to Americans only, or cold calling, or hitting your Canadian brethren up on LinkedIn. That's what we've seen. If you are a Canadian company and you are here, forget about us. Just sell to the Americans. They tend to be. I'm going to just come with some mass generalizations. More willing to take a risk on a smaller company. There are 10 times more of them. Their money is worth more, and they tend to be easier to work with. They're less conservative because they have more money and more experience. Not that us Canadians are bad, but I've seen it in myself buying things from other Canadian companies. I am a bad customer. So the future of Canadian prospecting, selling to Americans.
It's always been the future and the past.
Hi. When when you said that you changed the focus to quality versus quantity, what types of changes did you set for the SDRs in the types of questions, what they were driving towards for qualification criteria?
Sure. So we set qualification criteria, but we also metriced them instead of just on the raw number of meetings they booked. We metriced them on the meetings that they had held and the number of follow-up meetings that were created afterwards. And so I think a standard industry benchmark is 21 meetings held, and then we wanted to see, I think it was 6 follow-on conversations booked immediately after. So of the, let me think, so Trish Bertuzzi from Bridge Group has a great survey on this. It's on David Scott's blog, forentrepreneurs.com. They go through all of the metrics like these. And I think if you're looking on a per meeting basis, the benchmark was about 20, and you're gonna see about, I think 60% of those moving into active pipeline is sort of the industry benchmark. But what we did is we really changed our qualification criteria, and we changed, so adding in some more of the deal killers that we knew up front, and then we changed how we nurtured, and then we changed how we measured the team. And I think changing how we measured the team was the biggest piece. Because if you're paying somebody to book 20 meetings, they're gonna book 20 meetings. If you're paying them to book you 10 quality meetings, that's what they're gonna spend their time on. So it wasn't our SDR's fault, it was my fault, because we built this system that, made them do that.
Hey, Collin, quick question. So you mentioned the part where you had an account executive that was doing inbound and outbound simultaneously. What would you say to companies who don't necessarily have that SDR team, or maybe have a different model, and they have sales teams that are doing inbound and outbound? How would you say they could do it effectively?
I mean, it comes down to discipline. And our example was actually an SDR that was doing inbound and outbound, but I've been an account exec most of my life, and I've had to balance that. And really the only, I think what made predictable revenue so popular was the fact that it takes away things that account executives are bad at, right? And it says you can just focus on closing deals. You don't have to worry about prospecting. The substitution, like obviously companies have been wildly successful before predictable revenue. That wasn't like this giant aha moment where people started to learn how to sell to other companies. And I think the answer is just discipline and good sales habits. You have to make sure that as an account executive, I'm holding myself accountable to hitting my prospecting numbers every week, every month. The way I personally did it was blocking off time in my calendar. I would not accept meetings between 9 and 11 o'clock Pacific, because that was it was earlier because I was going to East Coast first and then West Coast, but I just had to put the time in my calendar. That's me personally. If you're looking for better advice, Jeb Blout, Fanatical Prospecting, has an awesome book, Sales Management Simplified, another fantastic book that's not super dogmatic about specifically specializing your sales roles in this way. And then, last piece, Shopify. Also, they don't specialize their SDRs, and there's a lot you can learn. I'm drawing a blank on the guy's name, but another Canadian company, and there's a couple of podcasts that he's on where he talks about the things that they do, because their average deal size is about $10,000. So for them, they weren't getting the economies of scale to specialize their sales roles.
How do you guys align your sales process, or rather, how do you guys align with your company's sales process, like the clients that you have?
How do we align, so like the pricing model or this like?
Yeah, I can add a little more to that. So like basically to make sure there's a smooth handoff between the SDR and the internal rep of your clients, like how do you make sure that that is really seamless?
Gotcha. So we've got it documented, and if you go on the Predictable Revenue blog, it's one of the last 10 posts talks about our handoff process. We have basically like a service level agreement with our clients. And not just we're gonna do this for you, but if we do this for you, you're gonna do this for us. And we made it, it's not just we don't make them sign it. It's sort of like a gentleman's agreement where you just sort of handshake on it. But we map out the process of like, this is what we've seen our most successful customers do. Wouldn't you like to learn from them? And we map out the process from start to finish. We say, these are the things that really help companies, book as many meetings. Because if you're not, if you're not proactive about that follow-up process or about the handoff process, we've seen as low as 40% show-up rates for meetings, which is totally unacceptable, right? You want to get that 90, 95 plus. All right, and so there's a couple of best practices. We laid them out in a blog post. I think it's something about our handoff process, and I linked to a couple other docs, because we're not the only ones that do this. There's some really smart people that have other blog posts. If you want, hit me up afterwards and I can share that with you. Thanks, Anu.
Good to know.